Islamic economy is one that's based on justice?
Social and economic justice,
Aha.
which is free from interest-free riba.
So we have justice, and part of that is a riba-free economy. All right, very good.
And there is an answer on the text saying essentially a socially responsible economy.
All right, excellent. A socially responsible economy.
And somebody else is typing online.
About division of wealth
Uh-huh.
after someone dies.
Uh-huh.
In that case, women gets half of the share with respect to males, and it is so because they get other from other resources as well. Okay, because they are not the kafil or wali of the family, so they get if they get full share from the deceased, then their share might be doubled from men. As you know that men has financial responsibilities of the family, so their share is doubled to compensate the wealth between women and men.
Right, very good. So inheritance laws, that's certainly a very important feature of an Islamic economy. What else?
Ownership really belongs to God. All resources, ownership of resources is divine, and therefore the answer as far as the producers and the consumer, they're all and they're answerable to God as well for their use, for their utility as well.
All right, very good. So the idea of kind of that we're stewards, we're not the absolute owners, so to speak. I mean, there's limited ownership rights. We're not free to just kind of use things any way that we'd like. All right, very good. And I saw a couple of other things come across the screen. What
Yes.
could
Can you? Should I read it out for you? Or can you see?
I'm not sure. Let me maybe if I maximize the screen, I'll be able to see protection of life, protection of the intellect, protection of our religion, protection of dignity and progeny and so forth, and then protection of property rights. And so you have this idea of these being the five basic objectives of the law. And of course, Imam Ghazali and As-Suyuti and others have basically related this to Quranic verses to kind of ground it in the Quranic text. And there is some difference between the scholars in terms of which ones do you put first of the maqasid, so to speak. Do you begin with protection of religion, which is usually the way many scholars begin, and add then protection of life, protection of intellect? But some other scholars in the contemporary period, like Sheikh Ali Gumar, the former Grand Mufti of Egypt, and others have suggested, well, really, you have to have protection of life first, because without people, living people, you won't have deen. I mean, there won't be a religion to protect. And so you have to have protection of life and protection of intellect in order for there to be protection of religion. And so they would order it in that type of sequence. So there's differences of opinion in terms of how one would order it. And Sheikh Ali Gumar says, for example, that in the past, the classical scholars put deen first, just kind of out of respect. The deen, but in terms of the logical sequence, it would really be protection of life would be first and foremost, and then protection of intellect, all of which are the necessary conditions for there to be religion and therefore protection of religion. So with that being said, just as kind of background, the maqasid al-sharia are of course extremely important. But then let's talk, and that deals certainly with the legal dimension of Islam. But let's think a little bit further and a little bit deeper and relate this to some of the studies that you've had in other parts of the course series. that although the Sharia sets the necessary conditions for an Islamic economy, is it sufficient for an Islamic economy? Let's say, for example, we have the Sharia established, and we have all of those elements present within the economy. Is that going to be sufficient to create an Islamic economy? What do you think? Think of all of the things that you've been studying in other parts of your coursework. How do those fit into an Islamic economy, and does the Sharia guarantee that those other elements will be present? What do you think?
By the other elements, do you mean the protection of life and such?
No, I'm thinking in terms of the following. The Sharia prescribes action, and we are, of course, humans act, they do things, but what else do we do that you all have studied extensively in this course?
Mm-hmm.
What else do we do? Think of Islamic art. We do things, but we also
Create things.
create things. Exactly. We make things. And so therefore, an Islamic economy is not only going to be related to what we do and how we exchange and all of the Sharia legal aspects of that dimension, but it's also going to be informed by the Islamic intellectual tradition as to how we make things. Right? And so think of, for example, Surah Al-Nahl, the Surah of the bee. And would anybody care to recite that? And or shall we just go to the English translation of it, just so that we can get a sense of this? Because what we want to see is, in a sense, how it is that Allah provides. What does Surah Al-Nahl, which is also called Surah Al-Iqtisad, by the way? Surah Al-Nahl is called Surah Al-Iqtisad, which means Surah of the economy. Surah of the economy. And in Surah Al-Iqtisad, it says the following. In part of the chapters, it says that, and cattle has he created for you, in which there is warmth and other uses, and whereof you eat. And in them there is beauty for you, when you bring them home, and when you take them to pasture. And they bear your burdens to a land you would never reach, save with great hardship to yourselves. Truly your Lord is kind and merciful. And then later it says, a few verses later, he it is who sends water from the sky, from which you have drink, and from which comes forth vegetation, wherewith you pasture your cattle. Therewith he causes the crops to grow for you, and olives and date palms and grapevines, and every kind of fruit. Truly in that is a sign for people who reflect. He has made the night and sun and day, the day subservient unto you, and the sun and the moon and the stars are subservient by his command. Truly in that are signs for people who understand. And whatsoever he created for you on the earth of diverse hues, truly in this is a sign for a people who reflect. He it is who made the sea subservient, that you may eat fresh meat therefrom, and extract from it ornaments that you wear. You see the ships plowing through it, and this is so that you may seek his bounty, and that happily you may give thanks. And so what is common in this? In other words, you have on the one hand physical use values, these Allah is fulfilling our material physical needs through all of these gifts that he's given to us. But what is he also doing simultaneously in these verses? What does he say that he is fulfilling in all of these verses with these gifts that he gives to us? Are they fulfilling only our physical needs, or is there something else at work?
Aesthetic beauty as well. Let's talk of beauty and comfort.
Exactly. So there's our physical needs and our spiritual needs are being satisfied through beauty. And then we reflect upon that beauty, and that's ayatullah. The pearls that are drawn from the sea, yes, they're used for, and we, fresh meat that we eat and so forth, and we extract ornaments that we wear. That's beauty. And then he's created the diverse hues, which are beautiful. And that's a sign for a people who reflect. And then the crops that grow and so forth. So all of the ayah that Allah gives us in nature fulfills both our physical needs and our spiritual needs. And so in an Islamic economy, if these are the gifts that Allah gives us to fulfill both needs, then an Islamic economy is also going to be based on the creation and making of things that fulfill both our physical and spiritual needs as well. Now, the Sharia guarantees which part of that? Physical or spiritual? Or both? You think it's both?
Both.
Ideally, depending on how we understand this, we could think of it as both, but in practical terms, the Sharia tells us what to do. It involves the actions governing certain exchanges, that exchange should be fair, for example. We should have just prices and just wages. But does the Sharia tell us how to make these things? No. The Sharia sets the background conditions, but it doesn't explain to us how to make things. So, for example, the Sharia says that we should not build a building that's so high that we can look into our neighbor's private quarters. But there are 200 different ways to build a building that way, right? And some of them are going to be consistent with that Islamic principle of beauty and aesthetics and fulfilling our spiritual needs, and some of them are going to be like boxes, right? Concrete boxes. It's like a garage or something like that. You can build a garage that satisfies that, but it doesn't satisfy the aesthetic needs and the spiritual needs. So for us to reach this other dimension, we need more than the Sharia. So if we think of the Hadith Jibreel and the three dimensions of Islam, we can think of it in terms of, and I know all of you are familiar with the Hadith Jibreel in terms of Ma al-Islam, Ma al-Iman, Ma al-Ihsan. The Islam dimension relates to our doing, whereas the dimension of Iman and Ihsan relates to our making of things. And so we need, in a sense, all three dimensions for an Islamic economy. If we are missing the dimension of Iman and Ihsan, then we might be fulfilling, say, our physical needs, but the spiritual dimension is really not going to be present because the aesthetics and the beauty and the philosophy of Islamic art that all of you have been studying this semester, right? I understood that you've studied Islamic art. Right?
I think it will come in later. At the moment, they've been given an introduction and immersion directly into various arts with some theory, yes.
I
Yes.
see, I see. But you can tell the difference between, I'm sure you can relate to what I'm saying. You've learned enough already about the principles and philosophy of Islamic art.
Yes.
It's completely different
That's
from the
correct.
modern context in which there's no symbolism, there's no spiritual meaning to it, and so forth. And so therefore, this also relates to the intellectual dimension in the sense that for our making of things to satisfy the spiritual needs of both the patron who is using those goods and services, as well as the craftsman or craftswoman who are making those goods or providing those services, then the requirement of it is that, in a sense, science must be integrated into higher orders of knowledge. That is the intellectual necessary condition for all of this to work. So, in other words, what is an Islamic economy? It's an economy in which, yes, we have Islamic law as a necessary condition, but it's not a sufficient condition. What are the other elements that are necessary for, that are, for sufficient condition for an Islamic economy is providing for our spiritual need, both for the patron and user of those goods and services, the patron of those arts, so to speak, and for the people who are making those, providing those goods and services. So that's really what constitutes an Islamic economy. And if we do not have that aspect of making being informed by spiritual principles, what is going to happen to those other aspects that are related to the Sharia in terms of just prices and just wages? In other words, if people are not having their spiritual needs met in the work itself, what does work then become reduced to? I'm throwing that question out to you. If
A
there's
function?
pardon me?
A function?
That's right, a function. And from the individual worker's point of view, if there's no intrinsic meaning or spiritual meaning in the work, what is that worker working for?
Somebody's written a soul-killing slavery.
Yeah, it is soul-killing slavery, absolutely. But what does the person receive at the end of the week or every 2 weeks?
Wages.
Exactly. Then it just becomes for the paycheck. And so if work then is only for the paycheck, then what care do we have about social justice? If we are becoming spiritually debilitated in our work, on what basis then are we going to care for the common good and social justice? In other words, is the Sharia going to be sustainable without those other dimensions related to the wisdom tradition of Islam?
It would not be.
Not be sustainable.
Yeah.
That's right, exactly. It's going to go by the wayside. It's going to be unstable. We might be able to keep it going for a while, but the soul of the Islamic economy is lost. And on the other hand, what do we need to protect the soul of the Islamic economy? We need an outer shell, just like the nut. You have to have the outer shell to protect the kernel, and this has been applied in many different, this analogy has been used in many different contexts. But in a sense, this wisdom tradition that informs the Islamic economy and the production processes, on the one hand, is necessary for the Sharia aspect of the Islamic economy to be sustainable. But on the other hand, the Sharia is necessary to provide a protective shell for that inner aspect. So they complement one another. Both of them are necessary. And when we have both, then we have the sufficient conditions for an Islamic economy. Does that make sense?
Yes.